Every week, someone new claims they've made the best AI model ever. This week, it happened 3 times. But what does it mean to be the best? While the tech world obsesses over benchmarks and metrics, they're missing something that's really important. Your opinion might matter a whole lot more than theirs. Let's talk about why, what actually happened this week, and most importantly, what you can do about it. My name's Al. Let's talk about This Week in AI. You know the old saying, what gets measured gets managed? Well, the AI world has a measuring problem. Each company and team has their own way to prove that their model's the best. And they do this with something called benchmarks and evaluations. You can think of them kind of like restaurant reviews. Some people care about Michelin stars, other people won't step foot somewhere without checking Yelp first. And then, everyone's got their own personal taste. In the same way, AI models can have different appeals for different people depending on what you care about. Speed, accuracy, creativity, usability. Let's look at this week where we saw a flood of new models and tools, each claiming the top spot. What actually happened this week? So this week built off of last, where Google released their new Gemini model, Gemini EXP 1114. We can talk naming another time. And it made big waves because it jumped and tied the #1 overall spot on the chatbot arena leaderboards. This is a big deal because for the first time, they're matching GPT-4o and surpassing the new GPT-o1 model. And on top of being #1 overall, this new model was also #1 in math, in creative writing, and in vision, or the ability to understand images. Now, either OpenAI wasn't too happy about that, or there was just a coincidence in timing, and less than a week later, they released an update to their 4o model. That model too then jumped to #1 in coding, in creative writing, and back to #1 overall. Then just the next day, Google said, hold my benchmark, and they released their new EXP 1121 model, which also took #1 overall, #1 in math, creative writing, coding, and vision. This got people wondering if this was their plan the whole time. But these weren't the only models released this week either. The open source world kept pushing forward. The well-known DeepSeek team released their new R1 Lite preview model that was focused on complex reasoning. Meanwhile, one of my favorite teams, the Mistral team out of France, had a couple releases. Their Pixtral large model was their answer to a multimodal model, or a model that can not only understand text, but also images, that performed very well on that vision benchmark we were talking about, but was open as compared to Google's closed model. And you can try out this new Pixtral large model in their brand new chat interface called Le Chat, which is really sleek, clean, and has some unique features that you can't really find elsewhere. Now, past the models, we had more tools, especially in the AI coding world. V0.dev, one of the most famous AI website generators, got some nice new updates making deployment easier. So once you have something you like, being able to share it. But they also said that they made some changes so that their model won't be lazy anymore and will actually fill in all of the code you're asking for. Meanwhile, they have a new competitor. Lovable.dev is the new kid on the block for AI generated coding. And we'll dive in a little bit more there later. But if you're saying that that's a lot, I'd agree with you. And that brings up that question of how do we know which one's any good? Should we just trust these benchmarks? Tech Twitter had a lot of the same questions. We saw Artificial Analysis actually dive into that new GPT-4o model and present some evidence showing that it might actually be a smaller, cheaper, less capable model that they just switched in. And we had other people wondering how OpenAI is consistently at the top of those leaderboards when a lot of leaders in the space, and I tend to agree with them, are saying that Claude performs just that much better than anything else. But we just saw OpenAI update GPT-4o without changing the name. Anthropic updated Claude from Claude 3 to 3.5, but now have a new version of Claude 3.5 that's even better. So we have a lot going on. And I'll get into my take in a second, but this is clearly a problem the industry recognizes. This week, OpenAI actually announced that they're putting evaluations right into their dashboard. Pretty interesting, and I imagine we'll see that interface of how you interact with those developed over time and be different for different people. Humanloop, for example, also this week announced that they're opening access to their platform focused on enterprise-grade benchmarking and evaluation, which is really important because, as we'll see later, A lot of the business implementations revolve around benchmarks. That's how you can measure if it's any good. And if it wasn't clear enough yet that people can't really agree on how to benchmark or evaluate these models, Anthropic spent the time this week to write a blog post trying to plea with developers to take a more statistical, scientific approach to evaluating. Let's get into my take. I'm going to start it with a question. If it were up to you, how would you measure intelligence? Because that's kind of what we're doing here. Honestly, take a second and think about it, and maybe share in the comments below. Is it IQ tests? Problem solving ability? Is it the ability to explain a complex concept in a simple way so people can understand? With language models, we try to measure them with benchmarks, and that's evolved over time. Let me give you a little bit of background. The OpenLLM leaderboard from Hugging Face was one of the biggest benchmarks when it came out. It's actually a collection of benchmarks that you can run models against. Here you can see the 7 different tests that are being ran against these models, and we have one column here for an average. Each one of these benchmarks are pretty different from one another. And just to make sure we're on the same page, we can look at some of the example questions here. These test everything from basic math to advanced reasoning and a whole lot in between. We even have a column looking at CO2 costs, which I'm not sure where they get. But this isn't an exhaustive benchmark. Here we're just looking at quality. What about speed? We might get into it a little bit deeper in another video, but the speed quality trade-off is a really big deal, especially if you're trying to implement something at scale. Actually, Artificial Analysis, that group who was digging into the new GPT-4o model from earlier, they run their own benchmark on speed, performance, and cost. This benchmark looks at some more objective things like the context window or how many words the model can take in and give out, things like speed, how fast it gets you that first word, how many words it can put out every minute, and how much does it cost you. These have been a couple of the more standard benchmarks that existed for a while, but pretty quickly it became obvious that these benchmarks did not tell the full story. And how could they? We're still trying to figure out how these language models work. We saw research from a couple weeks ago saying that these models seem to actually do some legitimate reasoning, not only memorizing data from their training set, which is super exciting because you may not need to have all the answers in the training data and it could learn some new things. But then we saw some new research this week showing that some models certainly do memorize information, especially when it comes to benchmarks. And there are definitely teams that are essentially giving their models the answers to the test to train on, looking at the answers for each of these benchmarks and putting it in their training data. This leads to some models like the 5 family from Microsoft, which was made to be really good at following instructions, performing really well on benchmarks, but definitely not passing the vibe check. So that got people thinking. What if instead of these tests and metrics, we just asked people which ones they liked better? That's actually exactly what Chatbot Arena, the benchmark we were looking at the start, did. They set it up so that you could look at 2 different responses from 2 different models and vote on which one you thought was better. And they very quickly became a leading authority on which model is actually any good. To me, that's one step towards a real world revolution. And it's also why your opinion matters so much. It's why it mattered that Gemini EXP 1121 did pass the vibe check. Because AI is only good if it's good for you. Even though the new GPT-o1 model crushed benchmarks on math and in coding, and seem to give some better answers on science questions than some PhD students, OpenAI themselves admitted that people actually prefer the writing and editing of their cheaper, faster GPT-4o models more often than not. This can start to help explain maybe the disconnect between people like Dr. Daria Unutmaz, who has had an incredible experience with ChatGPT, particularly the o1 model. And he also really loved the new DeepSeek model, which may be equally good at reasoning and thinking through things step by step, while other people may not feel like there's been that much of an advance. His day-to-day is PhD level science, not as much writing emails or editing blog posts. Meanwhile, on the totally other side of the spectrum, you have people like Ethan Mollick, a professor at the esteemed Wharton School of Business, who says that even though it might sound odd, video games could be one of the best benchmarks for these kinds of models. Because It involves not only vision, the ability to see, but you need to be able to reason and plan. And maybe most importantly, we have human performance at each one of these we can compare it against. When Anthropic announced that there was the new ability for Claude to control computers, Moloch actually went and used that to see if these models could play Magic the Gathering. And it's not quite there, but it's starting to give some new ideas on how to look at these models. People like Adonis Singh have taken that one step further, looking at pioneering a new Minecraft building benchmark. People really seem to like seeing which model can build something cooler given the same prompt. And weirdly enough, how these models perform seems to match people's experiences using these models for other things. So what matters to you? Writing, coding, cost, creativity, video game skills? That's where we need to start with what you can do today. The way you figure out which model is the right one for you to use is by understanding what you need it for. Personally, I've been testing AI models pretty obsessively for the past 5 or 6 years, and my benchmarks have certainly evolved over time, but today I'll show you 3 of them that I've been using recently to get a sense of which models are right for me. Those 3 are the ability to generate code, the ability to be creative, and the ability to create content. So let's actually look at some examples. With code generation, maybe we can try the new v0.dev update. We'll put it up against the new tool from lovable.dev, and we'll throw in one of my favorites, the Replit AI agent. Asking these AI tools to make a clone of something or from a screenshot or an idea is a good place to start. So maybe we'll look at what happens if we ask them all the same prompt to create a clone of the old Flash game Line Rider. This is interesting because it's not just about writing code. It tests the understanding of physics, different game mechanics, but also a user experience. We can let them run, maybe answer some questions, and see what they get at the end. Then reflect and think, hey, which one of these is best? I still think it's pretty cool that we get anything out of that. Period. The second one might be for creativity. And here, I like trying to create some visualizations. A lot of you, like me, might be fans of the YouTuber 3 Blue 1 Brown. You may or may not know that the library he uses to create those cool visuals is called Manim, and it's open source. So for something like this, which might be more step-by-step reasoning, let's try ChatGPT o1 and put it up against the new DeepSeek model that's supposed to do the same. We can give it the context of my blog post and ask it to go step-by-step to eventually create the code that would generate a Manim animation. And we might need to, again, answer some questions and tweak it, but this is part of the experience, and we'll see what comes out at the end. I really like this one because it tests both technical accuracy as well as creativity, and I also personally think visualizations are a really great way to help understand different ideas, and so I actually like using some of these animations from time to time. Lastly, something I regularly try is seeing if a model can take a blog post that I've written, for example, last week's, and turn it into a Twitter thread. But importantly, I want to make sure it keeps my voice and tone. And this tells me if the models are actually understanding the context and style and not just the words. For this one, I don't think it's quite there yet. Most of the time I'm going back and forth, and that actually brings up a good point, that for each one of these benchmarks, we certainly can get way better results by spending some more time on a better prompt, iterating on it, and we would definitely do that if that's something we're doing every day. But in this case, these are just tests to get a sense of what kind of results we're going to get from different models. And it's worth doing some of Anthropic's suggestions, like trying it a few different times. But these aren't the only tests, and these probably won't be the tests that I'm running in a month or two when new models come out. That's the point. Your benchmarks should evolve with your needs. So here's a few ideas for how you can start testing what matters to you today. If you're new to these, start simple. Pick one task that you do regularly that you deeply understand with your subject matter expertise and that doesn't spark joy for you. Maybe it's writing emails, analyzing a spreadsheet, or even coming up with a bunch of different ideas. Then just try it in a few different models. I'll put the links on screen here for some of the ones that we covered today, like Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, and LeChat. But that's not an exhaustive list, just maybe a good place to start. Then all you need to do is keep a note somewhere on your notes or email or whatever works for you with the prompt that you're asking and maybe the results. Now, once you try that, you'll immediately get a sense of which of these models might work best for you. And anytime a new model comes out, you'll now have a prompt with which you can test those new models, and you'll immediately see if it's any good for the things you're trying to do. This is so much better than any benchmark they could publish in their release because you'll have built up your own intuition. If you've already tried these tools a few different times, then maybe one thing you can check out is OpenAI's new evaluation tool in their dashboard. It seems like it was built just for you. See what happens if you actually generate a test data set, define the evaluations of ways that you judge them, and run it against your data. Then you can tweak your prompt to see your results. I'd actually recommend against fine-tuning for now, but just tweak that prompt and get a sense for it and see if it's helpful. You might really love this tool and come back to it, or you might realize that the simpler approach was better for you, and that's okay. Now, if you're really advanced, maybe you're looking for something for enterprise, potentially worth checking out Human Loop's new offering. Or if you're trying to build it and implement it yourself, I'd really recommend checking out Hamal Hussein's guide on creating a language model as a judge. This is jam-packed full of strategies that he's learned from 30 plus professional implementations. And it's something that I've personally learned a lot from, that I've been able to take and deliver some value with clients. So to me, this is definitely worth checking out. Lastly, no matter where you are on your journey, I'd be super interested to hear what you need AI to be good at. If you can drop a comment below, maybe together we can start crowdsourcing some real world benchmarks together. Because ultimately it comes down to more than just numbers. When everybody's gonna claim to be the best, trust your own metrics. When benchmarks conflict, trust your own experience. And so many of you have spent a lot of time cultivating your own subject matter expertise. Really try trusting yourself and let that shine. Personally, I'm making content because I believe that AI is not the revolution here. Empowering you with AI is. AI is not a product. It's not a feature. It's an accelerant. So what are you accelerating towards? All right, that's all I've got for this week, but I did want to end with a thank you. So many of you had words of encouragement, and there was a really warm response to that first video I put out last week. That meant a lot. The first YouTube video I ever made was me holding a camera, pointing at my computer screen, filming something I made in LineWriter. I published it 15 years ago, and it got 50 views. But creating content that entertains and empowers people has always been a dream of mine that's been on the back burner. And for the first time, thanks to you guys, it seems like this might just be a real possibility. For now, I'll see you next week. I'm Al with Alex AI, November 26th, 2024, and that's how I see it.